people, a lot of companies' portfolios out there, especially their international portfolios, are sometimes amalgamated between mergers and acquisitions. They reflect the interest and intellect of differing patent councils over the years. They reflect, historical aspects of a patent portfolio as much as they represent the future and the ongoing stuff. So part of the challenge is that if you have a very large family, sometimes you you can't really understand why the family is A, so large, and B, why they did it in so many countries. And this is where you have to start digging into the extrinsic data. Is one of the big areas, because people can obscure things. You can also, assignee data is not really as crystal clear in international filings as you'd like it to be, because in many cases they don't update assignee changes. You're still stuck with kind of an original filing individual. So you have to make inferences about the actual furthest reach of that patent portfolio and ownership of the patent portfolio by looking at other aspects of the patents, the inventors, and the input data or other family data related to the ownership.
Sure, or assignment data on family members to try and infer that information. It gets a little tricky.
Absolutely, and you don't know. In many cases, you won't be able to see where something's been abandoned in a lot of the other countries as easily as you will see it in the U.S.
Yeah, that's a good point. One of the other limitations that I do want to point out before we jump into some of the data is just because there isn't patent protection or there's less patent protection, in your analysis in a particular jurisdiction, doesn't necessarily prove or show for certainty that there's a lack of market interest in that country. And that can be because the procurement and enforcement environment of a particular country can sometimes influence filing and renewal trends. So for example, if it's a country where it's very difficult to get a patent, or if it's a country where it costs a lot to get a patent, or if it's a country where it's very difficult or expensive to enforce a patent, those things may influence my decision on whether or not to file, even if I have, a rather significant market there.
Indeed, that's true. So all that has to be at least assumed in the first pass through in your analytics, but then you have to validate using other resources as well.
Exactly. All right. So let's jump into how this analysis will be done in practice. And as we've mentioned before, the key place to begin is with your goals, asking the right question. So you never want to jump in and just dig right into the data. You want to start with, well, why am I digging into this data, to make sure you get the right data to answer the question. Am I doing competitive intelligence? Am I doing new product development? In your experience, Mark, what are some of the interesting questions that you've seen that you use geographic analysis to answer?
Well, I usually get the stock question: what is company X doing in country C?
Yep.
And I usually have to push back and ask, well, why do you want to know such a thing? Are you looking to compete in that space? Are you looking to maybe find a partner in that space who can provide competing products? Are you going to look into licensing? So a lot of times I have to go through this kind of narrowing question set to actually ask the question and say, we are planning to, the question might be, we are planning to build a $500 million facility in these 3 countries.
Yep.
To identify which country has the least intellectual property risk in it. And that's a patent question, that's a bunch of other questions, but so that, in my mind, is probably the most common generic question, but usually the common generic question is not the right question. The right question might be specifically, can I do X or can I do Y? And
that manufacturing example is great, right? So I'm looking to build a manufacturing plant where am I going to have the least IP risk? because that really sets the stage for how you're going to do the analysis, right? There's going to be a handful of countries that might be targets that you're going to be taking a look at. You know the technology that is going to be manufactured where you're going, so you're going to limit your search to that technology, maybe making sure to include some key competitors. But then as you get into the analysis too, limiting it to, maybe process claims are what you want to be taking a look at, or at least bring those to the top of the pile, because that's what you're going to be doing there is a process.
Yeah, otherwise you end up boiling the ocean, and nobody wants to pay for that for some reason. So.
Yeah, I can attest to that.
Yeah, the other thing that it also starts to come into play here is that if you're handling a client who has lots of different products, or has a specific line of products that you're trying to answer a question along the line, this is when really knowing some of the quirks and idiosyncrasies of the marketplace they're looking at, which they're not patent analytics, but their knowledge of the patent law. So, for instance, India has makes it really difficult to get software through, or if it's a pharmaceutical, there's a use requirement. You actually have to be using the patent in the marketplace. So, again, also that comes, again, adds a layer upon a layer of complexity into the organization. Also understanding that the target's, doing outsourcing or, sunsetting products to different countries rather than simply expanding. There's, again, asking the right question is so key. If there's nothing else to take away from this presentation, make sure you're asking the right question of your analytics.
Well, yeah, and that's a great point, because once you've asked that question, then we can look at how we want to slice and dice and cut up the data to get the insight that we're looking for. And just like in the last session, we talked about the idea of pivots, direct pivots and indirect pivots. Basically, how do direct pivots being how do I want to cut up the data using the patent data itself, and indirect pivots being how can I supplement with indirect pivot data, so additional data related to the patents, right, that might not be inherent to the patents, that allow me to get some more detailed inferences or draw some more additional insights. So direct pivots, right, a patent might be owned by a company. A patent sits in a class. Patents have certain inventors on them. And then indirect, we're looking at products that might be related to a series of patents. Maybe it's even in between the products and the patents, you've got a technology identifier which applies to the patents and the products. So that gives you a way to link citation data, budgeting data. Tax planning, I think, is a pretty interesting one in this category, because rather than looking at where the patent itself is filed, if you take a look at the owner data of a particular field or a particular competitor, and take a look at the location of the assignee of the patents, you might be able to glean some tax planning insights. If you see an Irish or a Bermuda or a Cayman or Singapore subsidiary holding the patents.
Absolutely, and you can take it about 6 steps further in the tax planning category, because what you could start to do is look at where notice of ownership of those patents occurs in the product lines themselves. So if you look at where the notice IP notices are, and you start to see who is actually doing the licensing there, you can start to look for licensing entity names. You can look for concentrations of inventors on the patent. So if all the inventors of the patents are in country X and the patents are held in country Y, you can start to even imagine and estimate the type of tax planning sophistication doing it. Is doing a patent box, which is pretty straightforward, or are they doing a high income royalty switch to a low income or a low taxation country royalty switch? This is really elegant little bits of planning that you can do, because intellectual property has to be named in essentially the entity that owns it. Therefore, you get a more true picture of their tax structure.
Sure. Well, and you mentioned the inventor data too. Digging into the location of the inventors on this patent data can give you insights into where there are R&D centers for
Absolutely.
the company or companies that you're taking a look at.
Yeah, and it's just things that can't obfuscate in taking these types of pivots. So all very, very useful. I mean, there's, and then just 2 seconds on different resources that I use for secondary pivots. I mean, I look at everything from financial statements to filings, I look to press releases, I look to LinkedIn profile changes, I look to other things on social. There's just no end to little nuggets that you can extract to help you make a better sense of the geographic patent portfolio.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Well, how about we take a look at a couple of examples, and we can see how some of this analysis can apply. So for the first example here, this is a pretty common one. We're looking for competitor intelligence. So at the start of it, the big overarching question is, what's my competitor doing? From an IP perspective, from a business perspective, what kind of insights can I take out of the analysis that I'm doing? So to do this, I'm going to go and I'm going to compile their portfolio. And there's a lot of different ways to actually get these portfolios compiled. Obviously, the place to start is assignee data, pulling in families of the patents that get pulled in from that assignee data. And then you can start to get a little bit more sophisticated digging into inventors as needed to try and make sure that you've got a full portfolio built out. Once you've built that out, you get some insights. And I'll just pull up kind of an example of what analytics might look like. It's pretty simple layout, but you can get some insights into what are valuable markets, where are gaps or unprotected markets for this competitor.
And if you just take a look at this, there's some just kind of gross insights you can take away immediately. Without even knowing who this is representing, you can see that it's probably a U.S. country, given the propensity for U.S. fines. It's almost 3x the level here. They casually regard Europe as to some degree the rest of the Commonwealth as also marketplaces, but they don't seem to have at least a really deep insight into the Asian marketplace, just as it will have an example later on showing how that's more easy to pick out when we look at all the countries combined. But you can also start to see here is that they don't do anything in the Indian subcontinent, which would indicate to me that probably there's a fair amount of software patents in this portfolio that we should probably consider. They either rejected the strategy for EMEA other than South Africa, as well as the Indian subcontinent. And so there's some immediate things in this picture that I would say, well, why does that happen? Why aren't they paying attention to India? It's a huge marketplace. So you get things very, very quickly kind of falling out here. I mean, some of it's pretty obvious. There's like a G4 or 5 filing strategy here if you think about the countries that they're filing in. And it comes out pretty quickly in the gross component. You think that's it? No, well, actually not. It just adds more questions to the rest of the next set of analytics that you probably want to bring into this. You also will probably want to split the portfolio. So go ahead. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No worries. And I think it's worth noting here that from a visual perspective, different ways that you visualize these analytics are going to show you information in different ways, right? The map diagram, for example, it's a compelling visualization, right? Because we all like looking at maps. And it shows you a nice, that's what allowed you, Mark, to be able to say, hey, look, there's not coverage in India, there's not coverage in most of Africa and most of the Middle East, for example. But maps have their limitations, right? I can't really tell from this map if there's Singapore coverage or Hong Kong coverage. That gets kind of tricky. And I also can't tell from the map some of the insights that I can glean simply from the bar chart that's above. Bar charts aren't quite as sexy as the maps, but from that bar chart, like you said, there's a large proportion of US versus Canada where that data is flat on the map.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, and you can also, there's, and this I caution people presenting geographic data is that you can't just show one view, because I think the showing of movement in marketplaces is much more critical to show than simple full counts. So as you're thinking about mapping this data out, definitely think about a year-on-year presentation as well as you're doing this, and how they would step in and step out of marketplaces. So
yeah,
that's missing from this view, but certainly movement is huge for competitive intelligence purposes. So definitely do that in spades and triplicate. So
exactly. Okay, let's jump to another example. In this example, I'm looking to acquire a company in a particular field. So this is an M&A target comparison. I've got a few targets that I'm looking at, and I want to get a sense from an IP perspective, any insights that I can add to the selection process. I want to know how these companies compare geographically. So I'm going to start by compiling the portfolios, company A, company B, maybe throw them into the same portfolio, tagged as company A and company B, so I can look at these things next to each other. And then I'm going to put the data side by side. And now I can compare and contrast with my own portfolio and where, say, I want to take the technology that I'm trying to acquire, strategic markets, determine the relative strengths or weaknesses. And as I overlay either my own portfolio or where I want to grow my portfolio, inorganically in this case, I get a really good sense of what is the value of one of these portfolios versus another.
Yeah, and this is a really great example of why you kind of need the geographic map plus the quantities in here, because if you look at the color code that everybody on the call should be looking at is red indicates an Asian marketplace, purple includes a kind of Oceania, New Zealand, Australia viewpoint, and green is European filing. So just I'm curious, just a straightforward review of this is that I'm comparing a company that has great complementary, assuming they're in the same technology, great complementary sides. Is one is strong in the marketplace where the other is not, or has not had a focus. So if you were thinking about a combination of widget plus sprocket, you suddenly have kind of immediate data showing a good overlap. Now we need to drop this down again another 3 or 4 levels to understand what apples to apples is in these counts. But again, here's a very simple, powerful way of discovering synergy in your intellectual property portfolio without too much effort.
Yeah, and I like how the maps don't look too terribly different. No. But when you just step back and look at the bar charts, I can see a lot of green, so a lot of European focus on WidgetCo, and I can see a lot of red, a lot of Asia focus on SprocketCo. Mm-hmm. You also notice that SprocketCo has a clear PCT filing strategy with their WO matters up near the top, where WidgetCo doesn't. They're more direct national phase.
And because we know a little bit about patent law, we also would probably guess that WidgetCo is a much more aggressive patent filer, having not having put budget in for direct filing versus kind of the staged budget of a WO filing. Mm-hmm. Process, which will allow you a lot of time to try and do things and abandon things that just aren't working out in over a period of many months versus filing it all simultaneously, not to get the prior art issue handled on your U.S. filing. So
Yeah,
again,
exactly.
something that's not immediately apparent, but someone who understands patents and how they, the process of how they file and when those filings happen, this would be fairly immediately available to them.
Yeah, and as you mentioned just a minute ago too, with respect to timing, we can similarly compare these companies for their trends, say filing and grant trends in different jurisdictions that might be critical to the technology that I'm looking at. So we picked two countries here. We're looking at Germany and Thailand, and I can see the varying filing and trending data of the two countries in those jurisdictions.
And this is really key as well, is also then to overlay where those filings and vendors came from, because what you can see here is that there are some obviously by WidgetCo had spikes in the last 2 or 3 years of filing, and in essence I think it looks like a catch-up to SprocketCo's filings in other marketplaces where SprocketCo got there a lot faster, and and keeps a filing rate much higher. And Thailand, not my top 10 country to file in, but you can see that there's obviously some significant interest by company number one, SprocketCo, in that day. So that you might want to look at that and go, well, why would anybody file in Thailand? I mean, you could jump in and see, did they open a plant there? Do they have a significant outsourcing presence there that they want to be able to control?
Right.
There's all sorts of secondary and tertiary questions that you can see just by looking at these graphs. And a lot of times people overlook these things and they just say, oh, they did a spike here, and they move on. But really the significance and subtlety of geographic analysis is, what do we know about Thailand as far as patents? Thailand is not a huge center of innovation. Generally, we don't have a great deal of other industrial base there, but they've significantly increased their outsourcing presence. So let's go see if there's any news releases on outsourcing in there, and who might they be outsourcing with, and let's see kind of what they might be afraid of and why they did that.
Several times that I've seen filings in let's say unexpected or less than expected countries like that, it's turned out to be tied to either a litigation or a litigation threat, and that competitor that was filing the lawsuits or doing litigating against the company happened to have manufacturing or R&D in that location. So the buildup of a patent portfolio in one of those unexpected countries ends up being tied to a key competitor's manufacturing or sales activity that might not be immediately apparent if you're just looking at the company target in a vacuum.
Indeed. And again, also, I guess another place to do is run the same analysis on inventor locations. Year-on-year filing by inventor locations, you can really start to see trends in movement as to where the R&D centers are and where they might be relocating to. Because one of the things, especially in U.S. data, is you can actually get the inventors' addresses, and it does help you understand how inventors may be migrating as a result of they stayed with the same company, but they've moved 600 miles or more location-wise, and a number of them have done that as well. So again, the sleuthing aspect of geographic and analytics is really key.
All right, let's take a look at another example. In this case, we've got 3 potential high-level examples. We're asking a very similar question, so we're going to group them together. I'm either working on a new product development, or I've got an existing product and I'm moving to a new market. That's the geographic tie. Or I'm even looking to place a manufacturing facility, an R&D center somewhere in the world. And I want to get an idea about which jurisdictions are going to present challenges or maybe more smoother sailing to guide that strategy. So to begin this type of analysis, I want to create a portfolio around the technology landscape. So I'm going to be doing a search around the technology of that product, of that, you know, what is my manufacturing center that's going to be dropped somewhere going to be manufacturing. So I can focus my search around that and build a portfolio, and then start to glean some insights into where challenges might exist. So we've got a very similar chart as we see, because when it comes to the geographic analysis, there's only a few ways to visualize it, but it's how we deal with that data that shows up that's important. So in this case, here's a small landscape that I've looked at, and once we have this data, we can start digging into the countries that are more of interest to see who has patents there. Because this is just the starting point. The next is who has the patents, and then what's the scope of the patents. And one thing that I would make sure to be thinking about is, just because there happen to be a lot of patents in a particular country or in a particular area, it doesn't mean that there's necessarily a problem. It could be an opportunity. I remember a scenario that I was involved with where we were looking to develop a new technology and did this landscape analysis, and part of that turned up a large grouping of patents by a particular company in an area. And if I could have just stopped the analysis there, saying this is going to be too much of a thicket, but it turned out that that company ended up being a, we'll say, an acquisition or licensing type target, which ended up being a great opportunity to inorganically grow that technology, as opposed to us having to develop it fully ourselves. So even though there was, what some might call a thicket in that particular area, it turned out to be positive.
That's great. I mean, too many times we only couch patent analytics in terms of risk. There is definitely the other hand of opportunity here as well, because if you're looking to move into a marketplace, in a former company that I was with, where we were sunsetting a lot of fairly sophisticated technology in the defense industries, we would actively look for people in the marketplace to take over production of certain aspects of our marketplace. And so one of the things we would do analytically was discover who was probably the strongest producer in a marketplace that we were never going to get into, and approach them with a packaged up deal of technology know-how and IP, that then they could come up and be the next successor and interest, and we could get a continuing royalty stream out of them, as well as get the sunsetted technology off of our books.
I'm glad you brought that particular example up, because it's a perfect transition to the next example, which is licensing. Just what you're talking about, right?
Exactly.
Trying to determine how a portfolio, so this could be out licensing like you're describing. You've got a portion of your portfolio that you want to move. How to determine where is this going to have good coverage, and who do I want to be talking to? And it applies similarly in the reverse. If I'm in licensing, either someone's approached me or I'm searching, making sure that that portfolio that I'm considering in licensing has the right coverage. So not just the patent scope, but also the geographic coverage for the products that I'm developing and putting on the market.
And what boundaries can I draw with my IP that are also enforceable in the licensing deal as well? That's
Yeah.
The geographic limitations become very important suddenly. So. But,
yeah, exactly. And you're going to have, again, similar visualizations. I'm going to draw up these maps, but it's how you apply that secondary data, right? That indirect data, whether it's my product portfolio or whether it's this target's product portfolio, to see if there's a good matching overlay or if there's coverage gaps, right? And that kind of helps determine the value of the portfolio, either to you or to that third party.
And if I'm the target of approach, so if I'm saying I'm being offered a patent portfolio from company X, I want to go back and do the same thing that they've done to me, but I want to go back and understand what is the level of bureaucracy and disorder in their patent portfolio. How many different assignment changes have happened? How much of this has happened in one location? So, and if I'm getting a bunch of technology that's older, what sort of remainder marketplace there is for that as well. So these types of geographic analytics have to go both ways if you're going to have an intelligent buyer of these things. In many cases, you don't quite have that the same way that you would in a standard same country licensing transaction.
And many times in a licensing scenario too, there's one or a handful of key patents that are part of that scenario. So if it's a third party that's come in trying to license a portfolio to me, whether that be amicably or otherwise, generally there's a few, maybe there's claim charts even involved, that are the key, and then there might be a handful or more that kind of come along for the ride because they're similar. And digging into those key patents similarly to see what the geographic expansion of the family for those key patents is an important part of that analysis, right? Because if there's just a U.S. patent, but 25% of the market for your product is in the U.S. and 50% is in China and another 25 spread across Europe, that really affects the way you might want to calculate the value of that license. Certainly you don't want to put together an agreement on worldwide sales at the very least, because of how that coverage actually applies to the products that you're making. Yeah.
And also, if you're doing that sort of thing, if you're doing outbound distribution as well, where you've got OEMs and that sort of stuff going on in play, you can also use that to determine kind of their reach as well. Because I've had a few clients who ended up with extremely diverse portfolios in all sorts of different companies because someone had recommended a patenting, which is the same as sales offices, strategy, which I don't tend to agree with. But so every place they had a reasonable amount of sales, $1 million or more, which didn't seem to be a lot, but they would have a patent fine. So that I run across that more often than I would like to admit. And so one of the things that we can certainly help people understand is what the practical reach of the licensing program should be, and whether or not they need to have all those different registered assets.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think the last point too on the family analysis here too, especially when you're talking about a patent that you're analyzing of someone else, just because there's in this example coverage in Canada, Japan, Europe, in addition to the U.S., doesn't mean that the scope of those claims are going to be the same. So this gets you kind of the first level of insight. Is there even coverage in the markets that I'm interested in? If the answer is yes, then there's a second step that's important, because we might find that in one of these jurisdictions, an examiner found a piece of art that wasn't found in the others. And so we have a more limited claim set. And that could affect the value, enforceability of the patents in the other jurisdictions. And that's important to know going in, because that's going to affect, I guess, the value of the license agreement in total.
And just as a plug for some of our later certification classes, we actually talk about claim analytics more in great detail and some of the bad things that can happen when you do have large claim differences from country to country. So stay tuned for that, everyone.
Yeah, that's a really important one, because a lot of these high-level analytics end up just being the tip of the iceberg. Sometimes you really have to get down to the claims to get your final answer.
That's true.
So let's look at one more example here, and this is around portfolio management. So this is something that's going to be happening across the board. You're trying to manage a portfolio, and really you want to make sure that your portfolio strategy is in line with your business strategy. It's a critical component of handling a patent portfolio. And the question is, how well is that overlay? Are the markets where I'm driving revenue effectively represented by my patent coverage? And so this is where you've got your own portfolio compiled and ideally mapped in a way that you can overlay your market data. So that's going to be your internal revenue data, in addition to an overlay of key competitor sales data, as much as you can get, to make sure that the overlay is right. And so in this, yeah, go ahead, Mark.
No, okay. This has become a key area of practice for a lot of larger portfolios, and becoming more fiscally responsible about where you file, where you keep. I mean, we're a decade out from the financial slump of 2007, but and we can see we were able to see long-term data and how that really affected people. I mean, a lot of people just canceled patents left and right, canceled their foreign filings, and have left themselves with significant gaps. A way to avoid that is to have an active portfolio culling and yield practice, where you look at what you're doing, why you're doing in marketplaces, identify what's a strategic asset and a long-term asset of the company, and keep those and prune those appropriately when they need it. But to really, find a way to, abandon and not pay maintenance fees where it's more suitable to bring that money forward into new filings, or address it in some other way. But portfolio management, in my mind, has always been kind of the little red-headed stepchild of in-house practice, because you never want to have fewer patents than the year after you had the year before. And it's, you don't have good analytics. I think that we are at a point now where good analytics and justifiable and defendable analytics are available for why we let things go, rather than cutting great swaths through a portfolio just because you don't have budget.
Well, and the beauty is if you can prune right, that opens up more budget for being able to protect in the right places.
Absolutely.
So it's really the combination of appropriate growth and appropriate pruning that can be driven by this type of analysis. Where you're not just saying, is this patent or this whole family, this invention, is it important, but is this invention important in this jurisdiction? You get down to that level.
Yes, and does it make sense to keep this alive for another time interval, because I think my marketplace is going to deliver X amount of dollars for the next 3 to 5 years, so therefore it justifies a keep live decision. So I think that's also a lot more of a topic for another day. But I think that the geographic analysis, again, I think it's honestly some of the hardest analysis to do in patent analytics, because it appears impossibly simplistic. But you don't come away with a true story unless you put some serious thought into your questions and some serious thought into the outcomes that you're trying to generate for your business people.
Yeah, agreed. And really that gets to, I think, the takeaways that we want everyone to walk away with here. Number one, and we've seen this before, it's formulate your question first. What is the message that you're trying to get out of this, or at least what is the question that needs to be answered to generate that message? Because that's going to drive the way that you cut up the data. In addition to that, geographic data, the beauty of it is how well it aligns with market data, right? And regional and geographic sales and revenue data. It's just perfect for comparisons, and overlays from that perspective. So it can be really used to drive business intelligence with respect to that data. And as we talk about the various, what we're calling pivots in this series, the different ways that we can kind of cut into and use the data either from the patent or data that's going to be related to the patents. We're looking at analyzing in layers. So I've got a landscape. I break it down by company, and then within that I break it down by technology, and then within that, I might take a look at regions across the globe of the patents, regions across the globe of the inventors, etc. Digging into each of those layers is going to provide a different level of analysis. And finally, like Mark, like you mentioned, the pure count data is one thing, but the trend data, how things are moving from a year-to-year basis, can tell another story that is not necessarily available just from the pure count data.
And there's also a general truism with international filing as well that if something looks weird, spend some time going and figure out why it's weird. In more cases than not, it is something of significance to tell your business partner. It's something that is something that they have done for a good and valid reason because it costs a lot of money to do it. And that's a very, very important piece of information to tell your business client. Why did they do something there? I mean, it is very rare that you just have silly actions internationally. Happens sometimes, but it's very rare. So be a sleuth, be a detective. If something doesn't make sense, dig some more. Right,
because at some point somebody spent money on that, and usually it's not small change. That's a
never
good point.
Small change.
Well, all right, thanks. That concludes today's seminar. I guess we can open up the floor to any questions.
Yep. Just type away in your chat panel, and we'll give you a few minutes to start questions. Otherwise, see you in a couple of weeks, everyone.
Okay, so the first question that we've got here is, are we double counting if we include EP as a separate category from, say, the EP validations, right? So Germany, France, Great Britain, etc. And similarly, when we're doing with WO, or I guess any place where we might have, a cooperative body like that.
I don't think we're double counting. We're simply representing where registrations have occurred, and so we're certainly not going to in the total count. We generally try to dedupe by family anyway, just because it makes more sense to count by unique invention than it does by all the countries you filed in. So I think this is just a procedural count as to what percentage of the portfolio goes through a particular route, PCT, EP, or otherwise. So if I was to present a count to you, I would certainly de-identify anything that is through a filing treaty like the PCT or something like that. So
yeah, for pure roll-up count. Now, so really what it comes down to is if you're going to roll up those counts, you want to take a look at how you're using that data. So I might, if I'm going to use EP validation data, so Germany, Great Britain, France, Italy, etc., that have been validated off an EP matter, then if I'm rolling that up from a count perspective for Europe, I'm probably going to disregard the granted European data, but keep the pending European data.
Any other questions?
Let's see. Will you be covering searching and analysis of foreign patents? So how to do the search and analysis specifically of foreign patents?
Indirectly, I would say, some of the basis of assumption here is how to type a search query into there. What we certainly could treat differently is some of the pitfalls of just believing what a commercial system gives you as a result, and some of the things you have to discount. So I think that's a very good point. But I think we're assuming some level of ability to type a search query and click on countries in our user base here. So if that's
Yeah,
helpful. Otherwise, go ahead.
it is a good point. And if you're using a database that has access, and good quality searching of international patents, then driving those search queries into those international patents can be one thing. But if, like, let's say the data is a lot stronger for, say, a few different countries or a few different jurisdictions, like US EP, for example, then driving some of the more detailed searching, maybe claim level, abstract level, description level searching there, and then extracting the international families from there, where those may not have come up in a similar search because description data, full text data might not have been available. The only downside that you have there is that it's assuming that that the patents you're looking for have a US or EP filing strategy in all of their families, which isn't a terrible assumption, but it doesn't always hold true. Certainly less and less these days, where other countries and more strategic filing plans are becoming more prevalent.
And if there's some specific question you have, please, I'm the only Mark Stignani on LinkedIn. Come find me, come ask me a question. Happy to give you my brooding opinions on anything. So if we don't answer your question here, please just jump on the phone.
So Mark, here's a question. You mentioned finding something that looks weird with respect to international filings. What would be an example of something that looks weird?
Okay, so if I find a year-on-year bump increase in filings in Argentina where it's relatively difficult to get an enforceable patent, or I notice a sudden drop-off of filings in a particularly patent useful country, I want to kind of figure out what happened during that time. So, in the case of Argentina, there may be a favorable tax treatment that the company is getting by filing patents in that marketplace. There might be a patent box to take care of. So there's lots of reasons why things happen. So, there's a lot of countries that people just don't normally file in.
Well, yeah, or a drop-off in a particular country might suggest a divestiture strategy, but it might also suggest that they changed the entity name that they're filing those patents under.
It could be, and then so you make sure you haven't missed an entity name. But if there's a sudden drop-off of patent filing, and I find this to be very true in the U.S., if you see a sudden drop-off of patent filing, you would probably do well to go look at the financials and see whether or not that company might be more distressed financially than you think. Because usually the patent filing drop-off occurs 3 to 4 years before the actual financials reflect the company's into death spiral, if you will. So
right. So the next question is, getting good analytics is a challenge. What kind of tools is Black Hills using? And I can field that. We use, and I know Mark too, a variety of different tools, but there's always a focus, especially when we're driving kind of the portfolio level analysis of going to Patent Buddy, which is kind of the primary tool we go to.
And I just say, really question the results of any commercial system you're using. I use 2 or more systems depending on the type of analytics I'm doing, because there are really wide swaths of poor quality data out there in a number of the commercial systems out there. And especially if you're trying to discover company ownership in different jurisdictions, I have not found anybody who does that well at this point. You just have to go and spend a lot of time figuring out who bought what when in the last year. So I do not endorse any one system. I use a lot of them. So, but some of them do it better than others. Again, if you want to reach out to me, I'm on LinkedIn.
Okay, so next question here is, how does one find the key patents of a competitor that actually are dominating the market in the form of products? In other words, how do we find the actual fraction of a portfolio of a company that holds true value of a company?
Well, if it's a U.S. company, they should be labeling them, so you should at least start on the product website and find out what IP is covering them.
If they've got a marketing program, yeah.
If they've got a marketing program. Secondarily, the second easiest way is to go harvest the marketing brochures of that product and extract semantically or statistically the key phrases and nouns in that marketing brochure and run that against the portfolio. You'd be surprised how often they use the same words. And then, of course, use a human to compare things, and that's the best way, is to have someone validate the search results after you've done a reasonable winnowing job.
Especially like white papers or any scholarly articles that might be published.
Yeah, proceedings. Google Scholar is a great place to start.
Yeah, those can help. But then there's a little bit of just, kind of getting out and doing a little bit of hard work market analysis and taking a look at this competitor, what their products are, finding the keywords for those products, going into the patent portfolio, finding the synonyms, doing the keyword searching, and getting good at tagging those things so that you can cluster them to actually get that data.
And then once you've got it,
yeah, and look at the claims. And then once you've got that data, though, it continues to pay off, because ultimately any analysis project should result in some sort of data that can be used and reused. Let's see, another question. We found that patents are harder to defend in Italy. Do you find this to be true? We are considering letting our portfolio lapse in that area. I don't think that I've ever had to do an enforcement in Italy that I can remember. Have you had experience there, Mark?
I tend not to enforce in Italy. I try to get a judgment in another EU country, then bring that in, kind of the cross-border torpedo litigation strategy. If anyone's familiar with that. But yeah, Italy in general governmentally has been challenged. So
I've definitely filed there because I've had a competitor there before, and some of that is for just pure deterrence. But in making that decision, the difficulty of enforcement played a big portion. So yes, we filed some, but not nearly as many as in other jurisdictions like Germany, where you've got a pretty fair enforcement system.
Yeah, I think we tended to bias towards German courts just because we got our best results there. But again, that's an individual tale, and I think that if you sought good Italian counsel, they would have a better answer for you in that respect.
Yeah, and it may depend on the technology too.
Indeed, the technology in EU courts is very, very crucial to having a good result or not. So, anyway, that's the best answer I can give you without any further research on that.
Well, that's the last of our questions that we have time for right now. Certainly, if you have any additional questions, you can reach out to Mark or I. We're both available readily through LinkedIn or through our corporate law firm websites. So please join us for our next webinar, which is how to generate citation count analytics, which is an interesting topic. And we look forward to talking to everybody next time. Thank you.
Thanks for your time. Bye-bye.